neighborhood, placemaking starts by identifying the resources that are cultural anchors of their communities. Connecticut and New England's Great River played a substantial role in shaping the nation. The river towns of Windsor, Wethersfield, and Hartford spawned a new interior, westward-oriented civilization that expanded up the valley to Vermont, the Genesee Country, Ohio, and points west. The great apostle of Connecticut civilization was Yale President Timothy Dwight, whose travels in New England and New York in 1828 is our first American tourism literature and one of the most Connecticut-centric books ever written. Connecticut is one of the seminal culture hearths of American civilization, a center of innovation, invention, and values that influenced not only the surrounding areas, but a huge swath of American geography. Today, the historic towns and cities along I-91, the Connecticut Valley Corridor, particularly the 99 miles from New Haven to Old Deerfield, contains cultural attractions, public collections, and works of art worth several $billion, a patrimony it is much larger cities and regions like Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, Denver, and Salt Lake can't match and may never equal. This is where America's heritage lives and where much of it was spawned. Connecticut and the Connecticut Valley are America writ small, close, and real. The potential for authentic place-based arts and heritage tourism is enormous and could be readily realized if the contributing states and municipalities collaborated. A mere 50 miles from Bradley International Airport are so many nationally significant cultural attractions that 10 days would not be enough to sample the best of what's there. There are firsts and bests in lots of categories. With an impending wave of baby boom retirees, it's time to realize that nation's destiny is a destination. This program will make 3 points. Tourism matters as an economy, as a basis for historic preservation and to promote civic attachment. Number 2, we haven't gone about it in the right way yet. Number 3, we're sitting on a gold mine, as accessible, diverse, and interesting as any place in America. Let's have a look. A comprehensive cultural resource analysis or environmental scan begins by looking at the natural environment, parks, waterways, and other kinds of recreational amenities. The river itself is an astonishing 440-mile body of water, suitable for recreation, has a profound effect on agriculture, and it defines the region's scenic allure. Most people don't think of tobacco as a New England industry, but it's been an important one in the Connecticut Valley for almost 2 centuries. And thousands of acres are under cultivation for this crop, and it has a unique cultural characteristic to it. So we next ask, what are or were the community's industries? What products were made locally? What kinds of things are associated with the community? A comprehensive resource assessment includes focusing on architecture and the built environment, understanding the different changing styles and periods and regionalisms of a place's architectural heritage. These are some examples of early buildings and building types that are indigenous and characteristic of the Connecticut Valley. Barns, churches, industrial buildings, and Gilded Age mansions are all part of the vocabulary of place. Buildings and built environment elements that give a place a distinctive identity and are grist for the mill in the storytelling and regional place image branding that we will be discussing as the course proceeds. Here in New England in particular, we have this extraordinary heritage in statuary and folk art and sculpture found in our burial grounds and cemeteries. War monuments, statuary, and public sculpture introduce a sense of history and historical narrative using art. In this picture from the upper right clockwise is the Barney Monument in Springfield, the Soldier's Arch on East Rock in New Haven, the Pilgrim Monument in Springfield, and the upper left is a detail from the Soldier's Memorial Arch in Hartford. As every place has a history, every place also has an art history. And some of that art history is told in the crafts and beginning in the 17th century with furniture. The Connecticut River Valley is particularly famous for this. In the upper right is a so-called Hadley box from Massachusetts. Lower right, a sunflower chest made in the 1670s in Wethersfield. Upper left, a scallop-top dressing table from Northampton. Lower left, a sunflower decorated chest from Windsor, Connecticut. And in the center, a chair made by the Chippendale style master Leflet Chapin in East Windsor Hill, Connecticut. These are all indigenous furniture forms and styles associated with one place in time, the Connecticut River Valley. The literature on Connecticut and Connecticut Valley furniture is abundant, and particularly the Hadley chests have evoked tremendous interest amongst museum visitors and collectors over the generations. Shown in the center there is the famous Hannah Barnard painted court cupboard from about 1720, actually made in Hadley, Massachusetts. The Connecticut River Valley attracted artists we now regard as famous, and also had some indigenous local artists that are not so famous but produced work that tells the story of our place. Shown from the upper left is a view of the Connecticut River, the settling of Hartford by Frederick Church. On the upper right is the Oxbow in Northampton by Thomas Cole. On the lower right is a view of Springfield by Nelson Augustus Moore. And in the lower left is the Three Judges at Judge's Cave, a story unto itself by Thomas Rossiter in New Haven. Both the renowned American Impressionist artists who worked in the Connecticut Valley and some contemporary artists use place-based imagery in their work. In the upper right here is a picture by Don Bracken called Ancestral Field. He's a living artist who incorporates soil, dirt, mixes it from a place, mixing it with the pigments. Lower right by Everett Warner is a view of the village church in Old Lyme. Lower left by John Wells Champney, a view of the old street in Deerfield from the 1870s, and in the 19-teens we see Willard Metcalf also doubling back to Deerfield with a view of that iconic street. The way artists render a sense of place changes over time. Here are three examples from the New Haven Museum's collections. And the upper picture is from the 1930s by D.D. Plummer of the New Haven Green. On the right is East Rock by George Dury, famous for his influence on Currier and Ives. And in the lower left is a picture of New Haven Green, the famous Three Churches on the Green by Colin Campbell Cooper. Yale University is New Haven's leading cultural resource and most iconic treasure. Its institutional resources and amenities create a rich environment for leisure learning and discovery. The Connecticut Valley is home to several institutions of higher learning of great history and fame. On the upper left is Smith College, in the upper right Wesleyan in Middletown, Connecticut. In the lower right, Trinity College in Hartford. In the lower left is Mount Holyoke in South Hadley, Massachusetts. Less well known is the fact that one of the largest Shaker communities in New England, it was also based in the Connecticut Valley in Enfield, Connecticut, shown here. Actually, there was a second Shaker community up north near the Connecticut Valley, in also the town of Enfield in New Hampshire. The Shakers were a religious sect that believed in communal living and celibacy, and their architecture and crafts are world-renowned. Few places enjoy the iconic stature of Bunker Hill or Concord Bridge, but in Connecticut and the Connecticut Valley also had a Rev War history and some extraordinary stories to tell, including Benedict Arnold on the left, the invasion of New Haven in 1779, and the role of Nathan Hale and Thomas Knowlton, shown in the lower right there, in the development of the special forces and espionage during the American Revolution, George Washington's spy team. Hartford is long known as the insurance city. Insurance has a story to tell about murder, mayhem, fires and disasters, the settlement of the West, the rise of the industrial age. How do you tell a community's story? How do you tell a company's story? How do you present this material in ways that engage visitors and residents alike? These are the questions posed by placemaking. Ethnic heritage is a facet of tourism that is rapidly developing. Interest in different cultural groups that have settled places, shown here from the Connecticut Valley, the Jewish Cemetery in Hartford, the Polish National Home in the upper right, the Columbus Monument in Springfield, Native American, the Quinnipiac Indian story in the New Haven area, and a rich Puerto Rican culture in places like Hartford, Springfield, and Holyoke, Massachusetts, offer rich opportunities for cultural expression. America's journey of freedom, women's rights, civil rights, anti-slavery crusades, and actually the origin of constitutionalism. Connecticut is known as the Constitution State. It was the first place in North America that really was had government by consent of the governed, and it is one of the rich stories that region has to tell. The Connecticut Valley has a rich literary tradition. Some of the authors associated with this part of the world are Noah Webster in the upper left, Mark Twain, the Reverend Jonathan Edwards, Emily Dickinson, and on the lower left, Reverend Timothy Dwight, Lydia Sigourney, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Dr. Seuss. The story of a region's great entrepreneurs and industrialists also makes for good placemaking strategy. Here in the Connecticut Valley, again, we've got the development of the precision manufacturing and the firearms and weed sewing machine company in the upper left. James Batterson, a monument maker and the founder of Travelers Insurance. Eli Whitney, an iconic inventor. And the lower right, Samuel Colt, also an iconic inventor. Distinctive downtowns offer a rich tableau for placemaking and cultural resource experiences, tours and podcasts and other things one can do to heighten the experience of a walking city. On the upper left is Hartford, upper right Springfield, lower right Springfield, lower left New Haven. We've talked about the allure of the rivers and waterways, what goes on, the recreational amenities, the fishing, the attractions and scenic areas are all part of how we assess and present and convey a sense of place. Museums are a critical part of the visitor experience any place we travel or live. Hartford's Wadsworth Athenaeum is one of the oldest museums in the country, founded in 1842, and has such renowned benefactors, patrons, and collectors as Daniel Wadsworth, shown in the lower right, J.P. Morgan, whose father is pictured on the lower left, Sam and Elizabeth Colt, Wallace Nutting, Frederick Church, Thomas Cole. It's an amazing institution with extraordinary resources that tell the story of this community and its history. Among other things, Wadsworth Athenaeum has the largest collection of early colonial furniture in the country. Furniture and decorative arts. Wallace Nutting, again shown in the upper right, was famous. William B. Goodwin in the upper right was a early pioneer collector. Wallace Nutting wrote travel logs about the various eastern states, Connecticut beautiful, New Hampshire beautiful, Massachusetts beautiful, and built one of the iconic early collections that made its way into an art museum. Another Athenaeum patron was Elizabeth Colt, the widow of the famous arms maker and inventor Sam Colt, first woman in America to build and endow a wing of a municipal art museum, the Colt Memorial Wing shown in the upper left. She was an art collector whose collection from the 1870s and 80s is still intact. These are great and distinctive stories that enhance the authenticity and sense of place anywhere that has such things to treasure. In Springfield, Massachusetts, the city library and 4 distinctive museums are clustered together on a single campus with abundant on-site parking right off of State Street near downtown. It's a remarkable civic cluster that includes the Springfield History Center in the center there, a Dr. Seuss sculpture park on the lower right, a science museum with wonderful natural history and dinosaur collections, and in the upper left there a statue of Samuel Chapin the Puritan by Augustus St. Gaudens. These are really distinctive civic features that make, in this case, Springfield a fascinating place to know and visit. The Springfield Museums include 2 separate art museums. The one in the lower right, founded by George Walter Vincent Smith and his wife Belle, shown in the upper left, a museum of collections of Asian and Middle Eastern art and American Hudson River School paintings, related things, and in the upper right, the Museum of Fine Arts, founded in the about 1930, which has European collections and contemporary art. In the lower right is the Visitor Center for the overall complex. Again, a fascinating place to experience and discover. To the south along I-91 is Connecticut's oldest art museum, the Yale University Art Gallery, founded in the 1830s and housed in this landmark building from the 1950s by architect Louis Kahn, with magnificent collections of Impressionist paintings, contemporary art, American decorative arts, African furniture, and so much more. The Yale Art Gallery may be the best college art gallery in the United States. Again, their collections of contemporary art are increasingly interesting, but they're most famous because the artist John Trumbull, son of a patriot governor in the American Revolution, one of our first American history painters, was its founder, and they house there some of the most iconic history pictures by him and portraits of the founding fathers and other amazing aspects of American history and art. Yale University Art Gallery has a truly astonishing collection of Americana and American decorative arts, arguably one of the 2 or 3 finest collections of American silver in the country, incredible examples of American furniture like this Newport desk and bookcase in the lower center, ceramics, and so much more. One of the great art collectors and philanthropists of the 20th century, Andrew Mellon, endowed and built the Yale Center for British Art, another architectural masterpiece by architect Louis Kahn, with literally the largest and finest collection of British art in North America. Sculpture, painting, landscapes, pictures of dogs and animals, and portraits of royals and nobility in 17th, 16th, and 18th century Great Britain. The Center for British Art is a remarkable journey through British history. The Art and Architecture building at Yale on York Street has impressive exhibits about architecture and design. Other college art museums in the Connecticut Valley also have extraordinary treasures, notably here at Mount Holyoke College and Amherst College. Thomas Cole, Frederick Church, Hudson River School, wonderful stuff. Smith College Art Museum in Northampton is unique, and it's probably the only art museum in the country with artist-designed bathrooms. You'll have to check them out. The region also has extraordinary natural history holdings. The Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History, famous for its dinosaur murals and extraordinary specimens and dioramas, is well worth a detour. This is an unusual niche that people wouldn't normally think of in relation to the Connecticut River Valley, but there are wonderful dinosaur collections and dinosaur history at Amherst College, the Rocky Hill Dinosaur Park in Connecticut, and also in Springfield. The Connecticut Science Center in Hartford has exhibits about the Connecticut River, about aerospace and technology, and Connecticut firsts. The Museum of Connecticut History in Hartford, across from the state capitol, has extraordinary collections representing Connecticut's inventive spirit, including firearms and literally thousands of products made by Connecticut manufacturers. The Connecticut Historical Society, founded in the 1820s, has special subject exhibitions, permanent installations, and one of the greatest history collections of artifacts of any state in the country. The Connecticut Historical Society has amazing pictures, one of the best needlework collections in the country, and perhaps the best collection of tavern signs in the country. All cool, usable stuff. The New Haven Museum was founded by veterans of the Homestead incident, in which captive Africans liberated themselves by rebellion and were acquitted in a court of law in the United States, one of the major landmarks on America's journey of freedom. Also the home of Eli Whitney, the founder of the Whitneyville Armory and the inventor of the cotton gin. Extraordinary collections. The Springfield History Center in the Quadrangle, mentioned earlier, has exceptional collections of automobiles, the home of the Indian motorcycle, firearms, Civil War memorabilia, and more. The Connecticut Valley is one of the few regions in the country that has 350 years of history and the architecture and museums to prove it, including these house museums: the Budolph Williams House, upper right, in Wethersfield, the Stanley Whitman House in Farmington, lower left, which present and preserve treasures from New England's earliest century. About 1920, the colonial dames acquired the Joseph Webb House in Wethersfield, which became the centerpiece for the Webdean Stevens Museum, a shrine to American Revolutionary War history and a treasure trove of American decorative arts and wallpaper and wonderful architecture in the historic district in Wethersfield. In nearby Windsor, Connecticut, the Daughters of the American Revolution owns and operates the Oliver Ellsworth Homestead. Ellsworth was one of the authors of our United States Constitution, the third Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, a member of the first U.S. Congress. George Washington was entertained here. It's a national treasure. House museums are so great. There's so many of them, but no two are alike. This is the Oliver Phelps Hathaway House in Suffield, Connecticut, the largest colonial house in Connecticut, which has a suite of 5 rooms with original French wallpapers from the 1790s. Oliver Phelps was a real estate tycoon. There's a great story there, and one of the coolest things about the house is this attic with almost 5,000 objects that haven't moved an inch since they were placed there a century or 2 centuries ago. The leading center of Connecticut Valley studies is historic Deerfield in Old Deerfield, Massachusetts, which has more than a dozen house museums and this exceptional exhibit facility, the Flint Center, shown in the lower left, one of the largest collections, best collections of decorative arts and local artifacts in the United States. Deerfield has been a major tourism destination for almost 2 centuries and is still one of the most interesting places to explore and discover the stories of America. The Butler Mccook House and Garden in downtown Hartford is a time capsule, the rarest and most interesting form of house museums. 200, almost 300 years of family archives and collections all under one roof. Nothing here was put here by curators. It's a family-formed collection that is archival, fascinating, nuanced, and detailed. Hartford's Isham Terry House, the story of two women that stood up to the wrecking ball of urban renewal, another time capsule. Family-formed collection, nothing in this house that wasn't there 100 years ago. Many things were there 150 years ago. It's Hartford's only Civil War era house museum and is utterly unique. The two most famous house museums in Hartford, Connecticut belong to two of 19th century America's most successful and famous authors, Mark Twain and Harriet Beecher Stowe. Both are National Historic Landmarks. Also in downtown Hartford is Hartford's Old State House, built in the 1790s, designed by Charles Bulfinch, a neoclassical landmark of great distinction, with exhibits, preserved public halls, and this wonderful museum within that was a replication of the Joseph Stewart Museum of the 1790s with natural history specimens and so much more. Connecticut's state capitol from the 1870s is a Gilded Age masterpiece with a hall of flags, Civil War artifacts, and a statue of Nathan Hale and a homage to the Charter Oak inside. In nearby Farmington is Theodate Pope Riddle's Hillstead Museum, the only house museum in America with major impressionist works hanging on the walls that have been there since the paint was wet. Pretty amazing stuff on an incredible piece of real estate with wonderful gardens and one of the treasures of Connecticut. In the river town of Old Lyme on Long Island Sound, at the other end of the Connecticut River, is the Florence Griswold Museum, the home of American Impressionism, a museum devoted to Connecticut art with an extraordinary gallery and a house museum where Miss Florence entertained and housed some of the great artists of the early 20th century. Also in the lower valley, in the town of Hadlime, is Gillette Castle, home of a famous actor, one of the most famous actors of the early 20th century, William Gillette, a folly with an extraordinary view overlooking the Connecticut River. One of the best and earliest community-based historical organizations in the country is the Memorial Hall Museum in Deerfield. Founded by George Sheldon in the 1870s, it is one of the most remarkable collections of local artifacts and art in the United States. Community-based historical societies are the anchors of their community, repositories of archives, photographs, memorabilia, art, extraordinary stories, and often the first jumping off point for kind of gathering together, your perspective on what a place has to show and tell, what it has to work with. This is the Enfield, Connecticut Historical Society, and Enfield has a few big stories that it is proud of. It was the center of the gunpowder industry, the center of the carpet industry, and there was a community, one of the largest communities of Shakers, religious order of Shakers in that town. The discoveries that can be made exploring local historical societies seem almost endless. This is the Historical Society in North Haven, Connecticut, with tobacco history, brick-making history, Native American artifacts, and this, on the lower left, extraordinary diary that tells the day-to-day experience of life in Greater New Haven in the 1850s. You never know what you'll find. You have to turn over every stone, and that's how history is made. This is the Windsor Historical Society, Connecticut's oldest town. One of the things that these organizations do is they serve children, they serve families, they serve genealogists, and they preserve unique treasures that tell the story of their communities. This is where the process of placemaking begins, is in the discovery of the local stories and content that is indigenous and specific to place. One of the great institutions in the Connecticut Valley is the Eastern States Exposition, held every year since the 1920s, known as the Big E. It's started out as an agricultural fair. All 6 New England states participate. It's almost like the old World's Fairs. Every state has its own building. Of course, there's a midway. There's a historic village known as Storoton that actually predates Sturbridge Village in that genre. In the upper right there is a cow made of butter. You never know what you'll discover there. It's a wonderful treasure trove of localisms. The Springfield Armory National Historic Site, an outpost of the National Park Service in Springfield, tells the story of the birth of the high-tech industrial age, in which machine-based manufacturing perfected the technology of mass production of interchangeable parts firearms. This is a big American story, big technological story, and this is a national treasure as well. Then there are these sort of wonderful specialty museums, like the Hadley Farm Museum, which is excellent because Hadley was such a remarkable agricultural town still is, but for 300 years it has been, and they began collecting artifacts and unique things in the 1930s, and this is a underreported treasure trove that is the kind of thing that presents an opportunity for communicating the story of a place. Here's something weird and wonderful. Yale Furniture Study Center. If there was a ranking for this kind of thing, it may be one of the top 10 repositories of early American antiques in the country, and it's just sort of the backstory, the back storage collection, things that most people don't see. They have regular tours. You can make an appointment. This is another national treasure right in New Haven. I won't dwell much on religious history, but like ethnicity, religion is another tie that binds, something that brings people out and inspires their imaginations. The Knights of Columbus Museum in New Haven is arguably the epicenter of Catholic history studies in America. An amazing museum, beautifully presented, well worth a detour. The Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts attracts superstars year after year for their induction ceremonies and has lots of wonderful interactive displays. Love these niche museums, specialty museums like the American Clock Museum in Bristol, Connecticut near Hartford. One of the largest collections of every period of clockmaking, from the Super Cadet shown here on the right in the fabulous 50s to the baseball theme bronze clock made in Connecticut on the upper left. Fabulous stuff, a great treasure trove. Not to overlook gardens and parks. Our city parks, our urban parks, some of them are extraordinary. This is East Rock Park in New Haven with wonderful walking trails, rose garden, lakes, ponds, hiking trails. These are beautiful things. The Olmsted brothers designed Forest Park in Springfield, which is the largest urban park in the Connecticut Valley, with so many features: hiking trails, gardens, statuary, covered bridges, fountains, lakes, ponds. It's really special, and it's the kind of thing that if you were visiting there or living there, you could learn from, you would love, you would appreciate. It's great. Like parks, our early cemeteries were often designed by landscape architects and have, I always like to think of them as one-stop shopping for art, history, and nature, with botanical specimens, statuary, and incredible stories to tell. This is Grove Street Cemetery in New Haven, a National Historic Landmark that covers the full spectrum from the early years of the 18th century into the early 20th. Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford, the great Victorian rural cemetery in that city with, again, amazing statuary. It was founded in the middle of the Civil War in the 1860s and has incredible botanical specimens, is one of the most beautiful places on earth in May and October. The region also has some great amusement parks like the Zip Line Park at the Portland Quarries in Portland, Connecticut, and New England Six Flags in Agawam. Although there are no major league teams in any sport headquartered in the Connecticut Valley, we don't lack for sports entertainment. Upper left is Rentschler Field in East Hartford, the home of the Yukon Huskies, and great football there. Yale Bowl, lower left. Vintage baseball in the lower right, and we have a lot of sports history here as well. Not to neglect the performing arts, there's the Arts and Ideas Festival in New Haven, Hartford Stage, Hartford Symphony, Yale and New Haven Symphony Orchestras, and music in many urban venues. Foodways and distinctive indigenous local restaurants are a critical element of placemaking, and you just don't get there through chain stores and the malls. I mean, what is it that makes a place special? Well, it's part of it is shopping and eating, and these are some restaurants and nightclubs in New Haven, Connecticut that are remarkable. I've always been a sucker for really unique dining experiences, even if the food isn't great, if the atmosphere is unusual or what they serve is remarkable and unusual. Hey, I'm there. This is the Student Prince in Springfield, Louis' Lunch in lower right in New Haven. Claims to be the birthplace of the hamburger and probably the most famous dining establishment in the Connecticut Valley region is Pepe's Pizza. New Haven is really proud of its measures up to anywhere as a pizza making capital in America. Really great stuff. Keeping it real, keeping it local indigenous retail, galleries, entrepreneurs with a vision for a shop of some kind or another, somebody that does something you can't find anywhere else. This is what makes places special. Shown here are New Haven galleries, bicycle shop, and the Pelican Tattoo in Hartford. Souvenirs make a difference and express the storyline and personality of a place. A lot of places don't have much. Creating souvenirs, creating distinctive products that you can sell in your stores and that remind people of where you are, where you've been, what it is. Well, all of this adds a dimension to placemaking. Places also need how to package and promote their attractions and stories. Of course, today with social media, there are countless additional tools in the toolbox, but the old-fashioned brochures still in rack cards that you see in tourism centers are still very helpful. And again, it's that thematic examination, that approach that enables a place to stand out in a crowd that makes all the difference. Well, this is it. This is an introduction to a place that is not really well known but like so many places has enormous untapped potential. While soft factors that are hard to measure are usually ignored by planners and economic development pundits, who can doubt that pride of place matters? To grow tourism and the pride of place it entails, we must first take a greater interest in what we have, make it our business and pleasure to know our way around. The writer Wendell Berry observes simply that a city and its region can define themselves as one community rather than an assortment of competing interests simply by asking, what can we do for each other? What we have here is almost an embarrassment of riches. Yes, we are close and perhaps in the shadow of New York and Boston. The great mountains and ocean vistas New England is famous for are not ours, but they are close, and what is ours, an endless array of national treasures and epic stories, is a rare bounty that will flourish as we share, promote, and embrace it. It's a parable you can take anywhere.